FIFA president Gianni Infantino says the World Cup could grow again, from 48 teams to 64, before the 2030 tournament kicks off. The idea started with South American football officials, who want a bigger stage for the competition's 100th birthday, and now FIFA's own committees are set to examine it. Growing the World Cup means growing everything around it. The matches, the broadcast hours, the sponsorship slots, the money. So let's break down why FIFA actually wants 64 teams in the World Cup. FIFA president Gianni Infantino told Swiss media outlet Bluewin that growing from 48 to 64 teams could make sense, saying it's definitely an issue that will be examined and discussed in the relevant committees after this World Cup. That's not a hypothetical anymore, it's on the agenda. Here's the timing that matters. This isn't some random thought from Infantino. It came right as the 48-team World Cup, the biggest in history, was wrapping up. The discussions regarding 2030 come right as the tournament wraps up its biggest ever iteration. The 2026 World Cup included 48 teams for the first time, vastly growing from the traditional 32-team format that had been utilized since 1998. So FIFA just finished pulling off the largest World Cup ever, and instead of pausing to catch its breath, it's already eyeing an even bigger one. Infantino's not shy about why he thinks it worked. He considers the 48-team field a huge success, saying every team played at a high level. Teams from every continent scored goals and earned at least 1 point, and 9 out of 10 African teams reached the knockout stage, compared to only 5 African teams at the last World Cup. That's his pitch. More teams, more stories, more nations with something to play for. But here's where it gets specific, where the 64-team number actually comes from. A pitch from South American football leaders triggered the mid-tournament proposal, opening the door for an even larger version of the quadrennial spectacle. This wasn't FIFA's idea first, it was CONMEBOL's. Rewind to the spring before this World Cup even happened. South American football's governing body CONMEBOL officially proposed expanding the 2030 FIFA World Cup temporarily to 64 teams, with CONMEBOL President Alejandro Domingos presenting the proposal during the organization's 80th Ordinary Congress. Stressing the historical significance of the tournament's centenary, Domingos wasn't subtle about his feelings either. He called it a once-in-a-century moment, saying, "We are convinced that the centennial celebration will be unique because 100 years only happen once." Now the number 64 isn't random. The proposal would double the number of matches from the 64-game format used between 1998 and 2022, resulting in 128 games. Doubling the tournament, doubling the matches. That's the scale we're actually talking about here. And the man who first floated it wasn't even Domingos. The 64-team proposal gained significant traction following a move by Uruguayan official Ignacio Alonso, and subsequent backing from CONMEBOL President Alejandro Domingos. Domingos has been loud about wanting this. He's described it as his dream and claimed such an expansion would unite the world just once. So why does South America want this so badly? It comes down to hosting rights and a rule most fans don't even know exists. The 2030 World Cup is already unusual. It's not being played in one country or even one continent. The tournament is planned to be jointly hosted by Morocco, Portugal, and Spain, with a special match and celebration also held at Estadio Centenario in Montevideo, Uruguay, plus one match each in Buenos Aires, Argentina, and Asunción, Paraguay, to mark the 100th anniversary of the first edition in 1930. One match each, that's it. Under the current plan, Uruguay, Argentina, and Paraguay get a ceremonial appearance, not a real hosting slot. And because FIFA has a rotation policy for who gets to host, South America can't just wait a few years and bid properly. This logistical shift would be particularly significant for South America, which faces a long wait to host the tournament again due to FIFA's rotation policy. Since the 2030 event touches the continent, South American nations would be ineligible to bid for a primary hosting role until 2042. 2042, that's the wait if this doesn't change. So for CONMEBOL, pushing for 64 teams isn't really about giving smaller countries a dream, even if that's the language being used publicly. It's about turning 3 token matches into something real. An expansion to 64 teams could mean the South American nations could each host a 4-team group, rather than just one match. That single sentence explains almost everything about why this proposal exists at all. One match versus a full group. That's the difference 16 extra teams could make for the countries pushing hardest for this. Infantino, for his part, has framed the whole idea as being about inclusion rather than hosting politics. He said when organizing a World Cup, it's important to organize it for the whole world. Not just Europe and South America, but effectively the entire world. And that every nation should be allowed to dream of participating. He's also floated the incentive argument directly. If you don't give smaller countries a chance to participate, they'll lack the incentive to keep improving, he said. It sounds noble, give more countries a shot and football grows everywhere. But even Infantino admits the actual decision hasn't been made. It's just now officially something FIFA's committees will sit down and study. And once you start looking at who benefits and how much money is tied up in every single one of those extra matches, the picture gets a lot more complicated than let every nation dream. Not everyone's applauding. In fact, some of the most powerful people in football have come out swinging against this idea almost immediately. Start with UEFA. Alexander Ceferin runs European football, and he did not hold back. UEFA President Alexander Ceferin strongly rejected the proposal, saying, "I think it's a bad idea, it's not a good idea for the World Cup itself, and it's not a good idea for our qualifiers as well." He wasn't just annoyed at the idea, he was annoyed at how it showed up. He expressed surprise at the proposal's introduction, noting, "I don't know where it came from, but it's strange that we didn't know anything before this proposal at the FIFA Council." That's a European football boss saying he found out about a plan to double the World Cup essentially through the media, not through FIFA itself. Months later, he was still saying the same thing. "This proposal was maybe even more surprising for me than you," he told reporters, calling it a bad idea that isn't good for the World Cup itself or for European qualifiers. And Ceferin has actual numbers behind his objection. He said a 64-team competition would weaken both the World Cup and regional qualifying tournaments. Here's why that matters for Europe specifically. UEFA has 55 member nations competing for a limited number of World Cup slots, and expanding the finals changes the entire value of qualifying. Currently, 7 of CONMEBOL's 10 nations are guaranteed spots in the 48-team format, while UEFA has 16 spaces allocated for its 55-member nations. That imbalance is already a sore spot. 16 slots for 55 countries in Europe versus 7 out of 10 guaranteed for South America. Ceferin's fear is that a jump to 64 teams tilts things even further away from competitive qualifying and toward just handing out invitations. He's not alone. CONCACAF's Victor Montagliani has voiced the same worry. CONCACAF's Victor Montagliani has also voiced concerns. When two confederation presidents from two different continents are both raising red flags, that's not a small disagreement, that's a genuine split at the top of the sport. Then there's the football side of the argument, not just the politics. Coaches have weighed in too. Ghana's Carlos Queiroz didn't dress up his opinion at all. Ghana head coach Carlos Queiroz was particularly blunt in his assessment, suggesting the most recent expansion has turned the tournament into something vulgar and ordinary. That's a coach whose own country benefited from more African representation, calling the bigger tournament a step down in quality. It's a reminder that more teams and better football aren't automatically the same thing. The broader critique that's followed FIFA around since the jump to 48 teams is straightforward. Critics argue that adding more teams devalues the qualification process and dilutes the quality of the finals. Every time the tournament grows, that argument resurfaces. And now people are asking it again, except this time about doubling the size of the finals in less than a decade. Because that's really the pace we're talking about. This isn't a slow, careful evolution. The pace of World Cup expansion has accelerated dramatically over the decades. The tournament maintained a 16-team format until expanding to 24 teams in 1982, then to 32 teams in 1998. And now, if this latest proposal is approved, the 2030 tournament would see the World Cup doubling in size in just 8 years. 16 teams for decades, then 24, then 32. A size that lasted from 1998 all the way to 2022. Now 48 and potentially 64 just 4 years after that. The growth curve isn't gradual anymore, it's compressed into less than a decade. Even inside FIFA, the enthusiasm hasn't been consistent. Reports emerging after the initial CONMEBOL push suggested Infantino himself was cooling on it. Although the proposal initially generated widespread discussion, reports suggested Gianni Infantino was not showing much enthusiasm for the idea internally. with French outlet RMC Sport claiming FIFA's president had reservations about enlarging the competition beyond its newly expanded 48-team format. At one point, Infantino's own public language was carefully noncommittal. Earlier in the discussion, he publicly appeared open to exploring the proposal, saying, "Every idea is worth considering." That's not a full-throated endorsement. That's a president trying not to close a door while also not walking through it. So you've got CONMEBOL pushing hard, UEFA and CONCACAF pushing back, coaches questioning the quality of the product, and even Infantino himself sending mixed signals about how much he actually wants this. That's the fight happening behind the scenes of what sounds, on the surface, like a simple numbers change. But there's a reason FIFA keeps entertaining these expansions anyway, even with all that resistance. And it has almost nothing to do with dreams or centenaries. It has to do with what happened to FIFA's bank account the last time the tournament got bigger. Every time FIFA has expanded the World Cup, the money has followed. And the 48-team tournament that just wrapped up is the clearest proof of that pattern yet. Start with the scale of what FIFA just pulled off. This was the biggest World Cup of all time, with 3 countries, 48 teams, and 104 matches. More teams automatically means more matches, and more matches is the whole engine of FIFA's business model. More matches means more broadcast revenue, more sponsorship opportunities, and more matchday income. The dollar figures back that up in a big way. 3.5 years ago in Qatar, FIFA brought in $7 billion in revenue for its 4-year cycle, up from $5.3 billion in Russia in 2018. But for the cycle built around the tournament in the US, Canada, and Mexico, FIFA projected $13 billion. That's a jump of 45% in a single cycle. And it's not a coincidence that the jump lines up exactly with the leap from 32 to 48 teams. Break down where that money actually comes from, and the picture gets sharper. FIFA's boardroom expected ticketing and hospitality income to treble, from $950 million to $3 billion. Broadcast rights to rise from $3.1 billion to $4.3 billion. And to add $1 billion in sponsorship revenue, taking its total to $3.8 billion. Every one of those categories scales with the number of matches on the calendar. More games means more windows to sell ads, more tickets to price, more sponsor logos on more broadcasts in more countries. FIFA projected $13 billion in revenue from the 2026 World Cup, a 70% increase from 2022, driven directly by the expansion to 48 teams and access to the US market. The expansion isn't a side effect of growth. It's being described as the actual driver of it. Even the way FIFA sells matches has changed to squeeze more value from every broadcast. The decision to expand the tournament from 32 to 48 teams played a pivotal role, as the number of matches increased from 64 to 104, meaning more broadcast hours and new markets consuming content, especially in North America and Europe. That's 40 extra matches, 40 extra broadcast windows, 40 extra chances to sell ads and hospitality packages and sponsorship reads. The overall economic story attached to this World Cup has been staggering by any measure. FIFA has cited analysis from the World Trade Organization claiming the tournament will produce $80.1 billion in gross economic output, including $30.5 billion for the US economy alone. Numbers like that make it obvious why FIFA would want to run the experiment again, but bigger. Now compare this all to the Olympics, historically football's biggest rival for global sports revenue. For comparison, the Paris 2024 Olympics generated revenues estimated at only about $5.24 billion, a gap that reflects the vast marketing and economic power the World Cup now enjoys compared to other sporting events. Until 2010, the Olympic Games actually outperformed the World Cup financially, but things gradually changed, with the real turning point coming when FIFA decided to award the hosting of the 2026 edition to the United States, the world's largest advertising and media market. That's the blueprint. Bigger market, bigger broadcast deal, bigger tournament, bigger number at the end. And FIFA has been explicit that a chunk of that number comes straight from adding more teams to begin with. The expansion of the World Cup from 32 to 48 teams has also resulted in higher payouts. Those payouts matter because they're the thing keeping national federations happy and keeping votes in Infantino's corner. Prize money stood at a record $871 million, with each team earning a minimum of $12.5 million. The winning country could make $53.5 million in total, $11.5 million more than Argentina received 4 years earlier. Every single one of those figures grows automatically if the field grows from 48 to 64. More teams qualifying means more federations getting a cut of prize money, more countries getting broadcast exposure they never had before, and more national federations who owe their new revenue stream directly to FIFA's decision to expand. And FIFA has been upfront in its own language about where that money is supposed to end up. FIFA is technically a non-profit, and after paying staff and covering operating costs, profits are distributed to the football associations of its 211 member nations. A number the organization regularly points out is larger than the United Nations. 211 member federations, each one a vote in FIFA's presidential elections, each one able to receive a bigger check if the tournament keeps growing. One financial analysis put it plainly, there is certainly scope to distribute significantly higher sums to member nations, which is also why Infantino is positioned to remain president for years to come. Since as far as individual associations are concerned, he's delivered on his promise to increase their money, letting them invest in grassroots football. That's the piece that connects everything. Every extra team added to the World Cup is, in practical terms, another national federation with a direct financial reason to vote for whoever keeps expanding it. CONMEBOL wants hosting leverage restored through more teams. Sponsors want more matches to put their names on. And federations across Africa, Asia, and CONCACAF want a bigger slice of a growing prize pool. All roads lead back to the same mechanism: expansion equals revenue, and revenue equals support. This isn't just a football argument playing out in committee rooms, it's also become a political one, and it reached all the way to a meeting inside Trump Tower. The meeting at Trump Tower included FIFA President Gianni Infantino, CONMEBOL President Alejandro Dominguez, and the presidents of the Argentine, Paraguayan, and Uruguayan football associations. That's not a casual football huddle. That's the head of the sport's global governing body sitting down with South American federation leaders in one of the most politically symbolic buildings in the world to talk about doubling the size of the World Cup. Not everyone who was expected showed up, either. Paraguayan President Santiago Pena and Uruguayan President Yamandu Orsi attended, while Argentine President Javier Milei was notably absent, meeting with US President Donald Trump instead. So while football federation leaders were making their case for a bigger tournament, an actual head of state was off having his own meeting with the American president. The line between football politics and national politics has basically disappeared in this story. Dominguez used the moment to frame the whole push in emotional terms rather than logistical ones. "We want to call for unity, creativity, and believing big," he said in a social media post, adding, "Because when football is shared by everyone, the celebration is truly global." It's the same language he's used from the start: unity, dreams, celebration. But strip away the framing and you're left with the same practical demand underneath it: more hosting weight for South America and more matches to sell. Meanwhile, the actual host nations for 2030 are locking themselves into the tournament regardless of how the number debate shakes out. All 6 host nations qualified for the World Cup automatically. Whatever size the tournament ends up being, Morocco, Portugal, Spain, Uruguay, Argentina, and Paraguay are guaranteed a place in it. The debate over 64 teams isn't really about who gets in anymore for the hosts, it's about how big the stage they're already standing on becomes. And the tournament's setup keeps generating firsts regardless of team count. This would be the first World Cup held in more than one confederation, the first in Africa since 2010, and the first ever in North Africa. Every one of those firsts is another marketing hook, another reason broadcasters in new regions want in. Another argument FIFA can make to sponsors about reaching audiences that have never been part of a World Cup story before. There's also a messier layer sitting underneath all the celebration language. Reporting has connected the choice of 2030 hosts to a much bigger geopolitical chess match involving the following World Cup. With the FIFA rotation system, CONCACAF, CONMEBOL, UEFA, and CAF were unable to bid for 2034, leaving it open only for the AFC and OFC, leading to accusations that FIFA intentionally selected these countries, especially those in the CONMEBOL region, to ensure that Saudi Arabia would win its bid for the 2034 tournament unopposed. That's a serious allegation. It suggests the rotation rules that lock South America out until 2042 weren't just an accident of scheduling. They were part of a broader arrangement that also happened to hand Saudi Arabia an uncontested path to hosting rights. Whether or not that's exactly how it played out, it explains why South American officials feel like they got a raw deal, and why they're now pushing so hard through the 64-team plan to claw something back. Even the qualifying process itself is being reshaped around this bigger picture, which shows just how much momentum the expansion conversation has already built. Regardless of what's officially been approved, UEFA announced a new qualification format mirroring both the Champions League and Nations League, where a two-tier process will be created so major teams no longer play minor teams, removing uncompetitive games. With the 36 highest-ranked countries drawn into 3 groups of 12 in League 1, the remaining 18 lower-ranked countries will take part in League 2, split into 3 groups. Europe is already restructuring how its own countries fight for World Cup places, years ahead of the tournament, regardless of whether the final field ends up at 48 or 64. That's how much uncertainty this debate has injected into the sports planning calendar. Meanwhile, South America has already made its intentions about the Centenary Plane well before the Trump Tower meeting even happened. CONMEBOL has been pushing hardest for the expansion, arguing it would be a fitting tribute to mark the World Cup centenary, with Domings insisting it cannot pass by as just another event, calling it a once-in-a-100-year opportunity, and noting that currently up to 7 of South America's 10 nations can qualify, while the Confederation is eager to secure more meaningful participation, given it would be locked out of primary hosting duties until at least 2042. So the political meetings, the rotation rule controversy, the qualifying overhauls, they're all symptoms of the same underlying tension. A continent that built the World Cup 100 years ago feels shut out of hosting it again for another 2 decades, and it's using the expansion debate as its main lever to get something back. So where does all of this leave the 64-team idea? Right now, it's exactly what Infantino said it was from the start, something that's going to be examined, not something that's been decided. Under the existing 48-team format, the tournament would feature 104 matches, and a 64-team competition would require FIFA to revise the qualification system, tournament structure, and match schedule. That's not a small tweak. That's rebuilding the entire skeleton of how the World Cup works, from qualifying all the way through to the final. And the signals coming out of FIFA itself have been genuinely mixed. On one hand, you've got Infantino publicly saying the 48-team experiment worked, and that expanding again could make sense. On the other, you've got reporting suggesting that internally, he's far less sold on it than his public comments let on. Reports suggest Gianni Infantino is not showing much enthusiasm for the idea internally, with RMC Sport claiming FIFA's president has reservations about enlarging the competition beyond its newly expanded 48-team format, making another increase appear increasingly unlikely. That tension, public openness, private hesitation, tells you a lot about where this actually stands. Infantino can't afford to shut the door on CONMEBOL, one of his most reliable voting blocs, especially not with his own re-election on the horizon. This is also the last World Cup before FIFA's next presidential election, and Infantino has confirmed he intends to stand for re-election, already having the support of 3 confederations. But he also can't ignore UEFA and CONCACAF, 2 of the other power centers in the sport, both of whom have said plainly that this is a bad idea. The commercial case for going bigger is obviously still there. FIFA has watched revenue climb every single time the tournament has grown, and there's no reason to think a 64-team World Cup wouldn't eventually pull in even more than the 48-team edition did. More federations getting a cut of the prize pool. More countries with skin in the game, tuning in, buying tickets, paying attention. That's the argument that never really goes away, no matter how loudly Ceferin or Montegliani or Queiroz push back on it. But the resistance is real too, and it's coming from people with genuine power inside the sport, not just from fans complaining online. Ceferin has said flatly that it damages both the tournament and the qualifying process that feeds it. Coaches like Queiroz have already said the last expansion cost the tournament some of its edge. And FIFA's own committees haven't even formally sat down to debate the number yet. That conversation is scheduled to happen after this World Cup wraps, not before. What's clear is that CONMEBOL got exactly what it wanted just by raising the idea. The conversation is happening. The pressure over the 2042 hosting gap is now public knowledge, sitting right alongside the centenary celebration talk. And whether or not the number ends up at 64, South America has already forced FIFA to treat its complaint as something worth solving. For the fans, all of this plays out as a straightforward math problem with a complicated answer behind it. More teams means more countries getting their shot at the biggest stage in the sport. More nations experiencing that same feeling 9 African teams got to feel this past summer, reaching the knockout rounds for the first time. But it also means qualification gets diluted, and some worry the quality of the finals themselves start to slip. Whatever FIFA's committees eventually decide, the pattern behind this whole saga is now impossible to ignore. Every time the World Cup has grown, the number attached to FIFA's bank account has grown right along with it. And every time it's grown, some of the most powerful voices in football have said it shouldn't. That fight isn't over, it's just moved from social media and press conferences into committee rooms, where the real decision about 2030 and whether the World Cup doubles in size twice in less than a decade is still waiting to be made. Al Jazeera FIFA Infantino to examine 64-team World Cup for 2030 tournament. Caught offside, Gianni Infantino confirms FIFA will discuss expanding World Cup to 64 teams in 2030. Goalcom Gianni Infantino confirms FIFA will examine 64-team World Cup expansion. Irish Times Gianni Infantino hints at expansion to 64-team World Cup before 2030 event. World Soccer Talk FIFA's plans for another 64-team World Cup expansion takes dramatic twist. King Fut FIFA to review 64-team World Cup proposal for 2030. Wikipedia 2030 FIFA World Cup. Morocco World News CONMEBOL proposes 64-team World Cup for 2030. Morocco World News What to know about FIFA's potential 64-team 2030 World Cup plan. Sportsbro breaking down the business of the US13BN 2026 FIFA World Cup. HITC How FIFA will spend record-breaking 13 BN World Cup revenue. Business Today FIFA will make $13 billion by 2026. Where does all that money go? Market Scale FIFA's $13 billion World Cup revenue surge. Sponsor strategies. Profile News 2026 World Cup revenues. FIFA US taxes top winners.